The overall concept for me is I actually believe careful investing in alternative assets is one of the most effective ways to have social impact. And so it's a capitalistic version of social advancement. There's plenty of nonprofit needs and things that capitalism doesn't support, not dismissing that at all. But this is an area where people can kind of feel there's meaning, how they're putting their money to work beyond just a return.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Emily, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plenty. My husband and I co-founded Plenty after we began merging finances, and we're shocked to find what a mess that could be. We've both been in Silicon Valley working in fintech for over a decade each, so we set out to build something better. Today, Plenty is a wealth platform helping modern couples invest and plan for their future together. We bring the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household. But we know in relationships, it's also not just about the products and tools, it's also about the conversation. And talking about love and money is still new. So that's what we set out to do in our podcast to hopefully make it a little bit easier for everybody listening. Today, I'm very excited to have one of our investors and guests who deeply understands the world of alternative investments. Mark Peter Davis is a venture capitalist, serial entrepreneur, author, and community organizer. He is the managing partner of Interplay, a startup ecosystem based in New York City that includes offerings for entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey and includes a studio, services platform, and a top-performing venture capital fund. Mark is one of the most active startup founders and investors in New York City, and through Interplay, he also manages its multifamily office. He's also an active podcaster, which I highly recommend you checking out his podcast as well, and the author of The Fundraising Rules. Mark, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm so curious. You've been in the world of venture now for almost 2 decades. What drew you into the world of venture and startups to begin with?
I think it chose me. I was an entrepreneur since I was a kid. Not really something I had too much say in. I just was compelled to try to sell, everything and exploit opportunities. It was just exciting. And so my whole journey, all the way through my life, I've always been trying to start companies and fill gaps and fill needs. And as I've gotten older, I've realized it's, money's important. It's part of the story. But this is a hobby and a creative outlet for me. And so it comes with a little bit of a deeper meaning.
So take me back to your childhood. What were some of these childhood businesses that you started?
Oh, they were terrible. It's like the classic stuff that everyone has a friend who is that guy, selling stuff. So baseball cards in elementary, candy in junior high, computers to graduating senior in high school. I tried to start 5 companies in college. I never could stop. And so for me, the craving to kind of build was both a blessing and a curse. And it was a curse because I was really bad at it. And I didn't have the skills and methodologies. And I just needed coaching to kind of figure all that out. But was a blessing in that, at this point, I'm able to do something that I enjoy and call it work.
So I noticed that you had an internship at the Lehman Brothers at the peak of the dot-com bubble. And from there, ended up actually spending a couple years consulting before making your way into venture. How did you think about those those early chapters, and what led you from each opportunity to the next?
The short answer was, most people coming out of Duke were going to banking or consulting if they're interested in business. I opted for consulting because I thought it would be a better way to learn how to build companies. Went through a couple cycles on that. Learned a lot. Not the most exciting part of my career. And then stumbled into venture, and it was exactly one of the antidotes I needed to start to rationalize the litany of crazy ideas I had. And so as I started to get the pattern matching and seeing a lot of the venture opportunities, I started to get a sense of how to invest more effectively, and fell in love. So that was kind of the beginning of what has now become kind of a perpetual journey.
That resonates a lot. I was definitely also one of the kids that was folding origami and selling it at 5 years old because I knew parents thought kids were cute. And so there's an opportunity there.
Yes,
starting
totally
it
works.
in my, yeah, for sure.
Kids,
I was like,
the
lead
kids
into
sell
it.
the lemonade. not the lemonade.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
And definitely when I spent my first couple years in the world of venture, it helped give me a framework to think about businesses, especially when you start a company, you can only bet on one thing at a time. I am so curious, as you've now been in venture for the past 2 decades, how has the world of venture changed?
It's really different. I'm actually take even a bigger step back than just during my career because venture business has been around since the 60s. I think there are three critical success factors in venture. You need to see deals, you need to be effective at selecting deals, and then you need to get access to those investment opportunities. And I think the game in the first chapter, call it 1960 to 2000, was really about selection because there was an extreme shortage of venture capital in the market. And so everyone saw every deal. And if they wanted to write a check, the entrepreneur was going to take the money. But when the internet came in, it brought down the costs of a lot of venture scale opportunities, asymptotically approaching the cost of labor. And as a result, companies needed less capital. And because those businesses were more accessible to the broader investment market, more capital flowed into venture. People just understood it. The net result is there was a lot of power shifted towards the entrepreneurs. And that's a great thing. But the byproduct of it is it made VCs compete. And so suddenly it wasn't just about can you pick the right deals of selection, it was about sourcing. And so by 2004, every VC is suddenly a marketer on Twitter and blogging content and podcasting like this. That wasn't the way it was. I think in the old days, it was, ivory tower, people you couldn't get access to. Now they're very accessible. And as that kind of ripened, the game changed again in 2000, in the late part of the first decade of the century, right? 2008 to 10, you had a world where firms started to compete on getting access to deals because now everyone was seeing every deal because they were doing all the marketing. Selection was increasingly getting flattened, right? In the sense that the business models were better understood, particularly in the internet space. And so the game was about getting into the most competitive deals. And so you have firms pop up and they start at creating value add narratives, right? Ways they can help entrepreneurs through operating partners or platform resources or industry expertise. And so that changed things. So in my tenure, when I started, the most notable changes are one, the competition dynamic has increasingly accelerated. I think it's good overall for society, but it's shifted more and more weight towards the entrepreneur, which I think is awesome. The cost of the amount of capital required to start a company has plummeted. Before cloud solutions, companies were to be started were needing $3 to $5 million. You can now pop a company with 50 grand in a lot of cases. So it's just a completely different world. The other major thing that I saw shift was when I first started the VC biz back in 2006. The name of one of the things that was preached was you don't outsource. We want to have all the core capabilities within a company. But that you couldn't have. No one used outsourced dev shops, anything, and that has flipped. Now we're in a world where we're trying to reduce the amount of overhead in a company down to core competencies. So you're managing against risk, but you're creating a really agile, lightweight, variable cost structure through outsourcing as many functions as you can. So those are the major shifts. And as the capital requirements have also declined, you've also seen the emergence of institutional players at earlier stages. When I first started the business, seed was synonymous with friends and family, and then it became an institutional product. And now we have pre-seed becoming semi-institutional. So that's that's kind of a natural evolution, I think, of this, of the cost of the capital requirements going down.
And for some of our listeners who are less familiar with some of these terms, would you give any numbers so people can even just understand or gut check a little bit, like what used to be considered a friends and family round or your first round of funding, and how has that changed?
Yeah, I think the absolute numbers may not have changed wildly, but the language has changed. So a Series A round, well, the numbers have changed a little bit too, to be fair. A Series A round, I think when I started the business, was probably closer to like $2 to $6 million. And now they're more in the 5 to 15. Seed was more of this friends and family concept, which was probably, hundreds of thousands. And now a lot of seed deals are kind of in the $1 million plus, couple $1 million range, 2 to 4 maybe. And friends and family now are the probably sub 1 million space, but that's starting to be populated by institutional operations that are categorized as pre-seed firms. So it's a fascinating paradigm, and it's a good thing for society, because overall what we're saying is, if you have a good concept and tenacity and the passion to go out and try to change something and improve something, and that's what entrepreneurship is really about, you don't need to have a rich uncle or rich friends. You simply need to have the ingredients of the company. And so we're flattening access to innovation, to being able to participate in that. And so people from all different types of backgrounds can now go to an more of an institutional pre-seed firm and get the startup capital they need to get in the game. So this is unlocking more entrepreneurs, more ideas, more talent, more innovation, and helping to accelerate the improvement of the standard of living in our world.
And one of the sources of capital for these entrepreneurs and founders is a family office. Can you help everyone understand a little bit more? I think some people are like, well, may never have heard of a family office or heard the term, but it feels a little bit like this black box. What is a family office?
Yeah, and it's kind of designed to be a bit of a black box for reasons I'll explain. Family offices are generally institutionally operated, so meaning they have kind of independent management teams, pools of capital for private families. So whereas a venture capital fund might be managing capital for various universities or insurance companies, large pools of capital like retirement funds, a family office is managing the wealth of individuals. Now, when you look at some of the private equity, so venture, LBO, real estate, a lot of those more traditional private asset categories, excluding family offices, because they go and raise money from institutional capital sources in many cases, they have to fit into a certain mold. And there's certain rules and arrangements imposed on them in a good way by the investors that kind of standardize how they look and operate. So a lot of venture firms operate in very similar ways. Now, the difference is when you get to the family office world, there's no forcing mechanism. There's no outside pool of capital suggesting a certain approach or discipline to the business. And as a result, family offices tend to have completely variant styles in what they invest in, how they invest, what their expectations are, how they operate. There's a phrase that if you've met one family office, you've met one family office. And that is very much not the case in pretty much all the other asset class groups. So the one thing I would say for folks, though, is a lot of the family offices are by design, to your black box comment, hiding. And they are trying to remain fairly secretive, doing deals and investments with other people through their network. I think part of it is that people with a certain level of wealth are worried about being targeted or taken advantage of. And part of it also is, maybe they're not always actively investing. Everyone's in different places, right? It's not a never-ending pool of capital. It's someone's bank account.
Right.
So it's a different construct. And I think the net result for people listening is, when you're thinking about tapping into the family office market, you have to know that they're all completely variant. There's no consistency or patterns. And it's kind of by design hard to navigate. So if you're looking to tap into family office capital, you really need to have partners who are in the space and know the market well. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely challenging. And that stands in stark contrast to venture, where it's very standardized And there's services out there. In fact, we're involved with one called Thunder.vc that helps entrepreneurs navigate the market. And it's like going to a website and you can find everything you want. So it's just a completely different end of the spectrum in terms of transparency.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that we've seen family offices invest in consistently over time is this world of alternative investments. From the perspective of an everyday household who might have heard the term and isn't sure if it's right for them, what does an alternative investment even mean?
So alternative investments is a bucket to describe things that pretty much aren't stocks and bonds. That's kind of probably the simplest. I'm sure there's a more accurate definition somewhere from another party. But when most people are thinking about investing, they're thinking, hey, I've got savings or extra money, stock market, or maybe the bond market, here I come. And that is what most financial advisors are selling and advertising. Alternative investments is kind of everything else. It's a catch-all. And so this can range from private funds that invest in real estate, private funds that invest in private companies, all the way to things that are a little bit more bespoke, like art or private car collections. And so the alternative asset universe is kind of the everything else catch-all. Now, within it, there are segments of the market that are very robust and institutionalized, meaning there's a lot of legal understanding. The methodologies are very well developed. They're very process-oriented. They're very consistent. And so the markets that fit in that side of the world are going to be the real estate, investing, venture capital, private equity, and hedge funds. Those are the four most institutionalized elements of alternative assets. So when a lot of people are talking about alternative assets, they're usually referring just to those four. And they're not necessarily referring to the long tail of other asset classes. Now, a lot of investors do get interested in the long tail because they're less correlated with the overall market. If you're buying a wine collection, well, stocks going up or down probably doesn't change the value of the wine too much. So that's interesting to some folks. But that's usually edge case investing. That's the stuff people do after they've kind of are well penetrated in VC, LBO, real estate, and hedge funds.
I once had a dinner with an investor who was telling us about how great of an investment whiskey was. And then his wife mentioned, well, it's not a great investment when you drink it.
I prefer investments you can't consume. There's always wasting your money.
A little bit less rigor required.
And there's also the alternative asset world. I mean, there's so many things. Art's in there. Dinosaur bones are in there, right? People collect those as an investment. Who knew? And they hold on to them. And there's people who want to buy them in the future. And, that's in that bucket. But most of the time, people are talking about one of those four buckets of real estate, LBO, VC, or hedge funds.
And when they're thinking about those four much more common and structured buckets of alternative investments, what are some pros and cons, or why would people want to invest in them and to have exposure in their portfolio?
So the main attraction of these assets is that the firms that perform well tend to outperform the performance of the S&P. So these are generally investment products that can generate more yield, grow wealth faster. The major downside to these generally, and again, there's plenty of exceptions to all of these comments, is that they're less liquid. Meaning, if you buy the S&P 500 and you realize, you need money for a medical bill or to buy a house, you can sell. It's a pretty liquid market. You just click buttons on a website, the money shows up in a bank account. There's, I don't know how many umpteen million transactions a day happening in that market. When you put money into a leveraged buyout fund that is going to methodically buy 5, maybe private companies over the next handful of years and then sell them or take them public, It's not very liquid. The cash is kind of locked up. Now, there are some ways to get out of those transactions, but usually there's pretty significant penalties, either charged by the funds or you end up selling the positions to another party at a discount. But it's not easy. It's not clicking a button. You have to kind of go work a network and find a buyer. Yeah. So this is an appealing asset class to people who are willing to put money away and lock it up and hope that they make more money than they would have if they had more access to the capital. So that's kind of the trade-off. Yeah. In theory, you're getting higher returns for a less liquid asset.
Yeah. And just so people can have a gut reaction to even understand, how different a return they might be able to get or how much of a lockup, do you have even just rough ranges just so people can understand how that compares to a stock or bond portfolio?
Yeah. So I believe the S&P 500 over the last 80 or so years has done about 7 to 8% return annualized. I would say the fat part of the bell curve, so kind of center, not the best, but like center of the target. And it varies by category, real estate, LBO, venture, and also varies within each of those by the type of sector they're exposed to. You'd be looking at kind of 10 to 20% for a lot of return profile, sometimes higher. And so there are some really famous investors who built a reputation managing university endowments. And their concept was to invest in the top performing managers in each of those buckets. Yeah. And to try to get really outsized yields. And so most notably, it's a gentleman named David Swensen, who was the CIO of Yale's endowment for a long time. And he kind of pioneered what's currently called the endowment model. And the endowment model has been copied by many universities. And what they do in these models is instead of just doing stocks and bonds, they also have a huge allocation to alternative assets. Yeah. Money that they're not going to have to touch for 10, 20 years. Yeah. But in exchange for locking the capital up, they're expecting to get a premium, an extra return. And some of these endowments have knocked out 15, 17, 18, 19, 20% IRRs, annual return rates, over a long period of time. And that's a big deal because compound interest is massive. And so the difference between 7 or 8% and 15% is more than double over time. It's a lot more. And so this really adds up.
And right now, how have you also seen the access for everyday families change for alternative investments over the last decade?
So historically, and there's mixed opinions on this, the SEC has had regulation to protect investors from private assets. And I think I'm sure there's historians that cover this in great depth, but I think the general fear was that there was a lot of swindlers walking around in the past saying, hey, give me your money. And they might never invest it. They might disappear with the money. Yeah. So people would literally steal the money. And so what the government does is as a proxy for sophistication, they look at the net worth of a family. And they say, hey, you have to earn over X or be worth over Y to be what they call an accredited investor. And only accredited investors historically have been allowed to invest in these private assets. So that basically means they're limited to fairly wealthy people, which you can see there's some unfairness built into that system. The laws have changed. There's people who are better to speak to this than me for sure. Opening up access to these types of products. Now, the challenge is not all the managers who are doing these things have the ability or energy to raise $10,000 investments, right? When they can get a $10 million investment from one investor. Right. So generally, they are still funded by large pools of capital. But increasingly, there are different apps out there and websites and services that are democratizing access to private assets. And you can go in, at kind of different wealth levels and buy in and get access to real estate exposure, venture capital, and others. And then venture capital is kind of new on the scene. There's a number of firms out there now trying to make that available through various mobile apps.
Yeah.
How those firms perform is an unknown.
Yeah.
Because they're competing with other folks who have committed large pools of capital. And actually, the type of capital they have, the access to it, may affect their ability to perform.
Yeah.
If their money isn't as reliable or as the bank account isn't as deep, they might not be able to do the best deals. Yeah. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But there is a good faith effort in something that I'm personally excited about to give more people access to these return profiles. Now, the good news is a lot of people are getting access to these products indirectly through their retirement program or their pension. Pension funds are huge investors via the endowment model. So they're investing in LBO venture capital. And so a lot of people are benefiting from these investment activities through their retirement accounts, and the allocation is being done by the management team of the pension.
Well, as I mentioned at the very beginning of our podcast, one of the things at Plenty we are dedicated to is bringing the investment strategies and products of the wealthy to the everyday household. So you heard it here first. It's on our roadmap to bring easier access to alternative investments because we want everyday households who arguably could use it the most to be able to use it to build their wealth too. One thing I am really curious about, as you think about really from the perspective of everyday families, thinking about potentially a couple who's call it in their mid-30s, how would you think about coaching them through? And again, caveat, this is not investment advice, financial advice, or tax advice. It's not personalized. But broadly, what advice would you give for a couple who's in their 30s and starting to think about what amount of money they could allocate or should allocate to some of these alternative investments?
That's a great question. Everyone should consult a financial professional to figure out what's right for them. There's no one answer. The general framework for these assets is that they are longer hold to yield. So it's not a great idea to participate in alternative assets in most cases if you're going to need the money for a known purchase, a medical bill, a house, whatever, and that's coming up in a certain time frame. If the time frame of the asset maturity is shorter than when you'll need it, then it might make sense. But the game is a little bit of budgeting and planning. And so that's kind of how I think about it. We go through exercises of thinking about liquidity. When do you need money, and do you have money set aside for it? Alternative assets, in my experience, generally play best when the money is not needed for extremely long periods of time. And so there's a trade-off there. You can't use the money if you change your mind in most cases. But if you invest it in the best managers, in theory, you should be generating a higher yield, and it should be growing much faster.
And when you say longer time frames, do you have like a rough range of like what time frame that might be?
It varies by asset class. The short answer is fund managers, some of them on the extremely liquid version might be like hedge funds, which typically are investing in public securities. They might only have a 3, 6, or 12-month lockup on the capital, and then it might be accessible. Private equity LBO funds tend to be closer to 7 to 10 years. Venture is the longest. Venture, generally you're looking at 10 plus years for getting the entire position liquidated.
Changing gears a little bit. So you've had a chance to invest in all these different investments over the course of your career. What is the most out there alternative investment that you've backed?
You'll appreciate this. We've purchased a position in Stripe, which I know is your alma mater. So I'm going to throw that out. Great company.
Great investment.
Yep. I think it will be. And then a bunch of other private companies like SpaceX. We recently invested in Figure AI, which is a humanoid robotics company. But then through the managers, we're investing indirectly into software, pharmaceuticals, energy, real estate. Generally, the things that are making the most money are the things that are having the most positive impact for society. That's a wonderful correlation. And that's the system working at its best. So take real estate, for example. A lot of fund managers will go out and buy real estate and they'll pay down the leverage. And that's kind of the model. That typically generates a certain profile of return, kind of an average return. When those same real estate GPs go out and find an asset that they can really not just pay down the leverage, but they can renovate and improve, and the value will proportionally go up, they generally generate better returns. So it's less exciting maybe and less out there to your question. But the overall concept for me is I actually believe careful investing in alternative assets is one of the most effective ways to have social impact. And so it's a capitalistic version of social advancement. There's plenty of nonprofit needs and things that capitalism doesn't support, not dismissing that at all. But this is an area where people can kind of feel there's meaning in what how they're putting their money to work beyond just a return.
And I know that was something that resonated with me when I talked to you and your team all the way through, which is having impact through business. Yeah,
that's a core mission for us, helping entrepreneurs, because we believe they drive social change.
Mark, thank you so much for making time to be on our show today. To wrap up our show, I have a few lightning round questions, if that sounds good to you.
Oh, boy.
First one, what recent purchase under $100 has improved your life?
Oh, I have a good one. There's a little charging pad, Anker charging pad that I found on Amazon that is awesome for charging your phone. But the magic thing is it also serves as a stand. So when you're on flights, you can flip your phone sideways. It's charging. And you can watch the show.
I remember looking at that one. I have the version of it where you can charge 2 phones and AirPods and an Apple Watch at once. It is
Why
magic.
You got to one up me? What's happening?
Well, for a show for couples, charge both iPhones at once and never fight over the same charger again.
That's a great idea.
But also relationship tips along with the product tips. What's one of the things that was on your bucket list that was just as great or even better than you imagined it would be?
I liked indoor skydiving. So I decided that actual skydiving was not the right decision for me as a parent and people that having people that I need to support and take care of. But indoor skydiving was awesome and a lot of fun and a great innovation that you don't have to jump out of a plane to have the same experience now.
I love that. And I have a feeling that is probably the path that I would take as well. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. We're so excited and grateful that you were able to join us. And I will also share some of the links about you and Interplay with all of our listeners. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.